Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Portrait of Deception by Kathryn Dodson. And this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Margo McAllister had promised herself her photographs would change the world. That dream would come true in a mere 14 hours, just a few shutter clicks away. Favored to win the Butler Prize, the world's most prestigious photography award, Margo surveyed the crowd gathered for the pre-announcement soiree. If her peers and mentors were right, she'd win not just tomorrow's prize, but the fame and adulation that went with it, just like her father had 30 years earlier. She raised a brow at a passing waiter. He handed her a flute of champagne from a silver tray before sauntering away. "To me," she whispered, "and to you, Dad." Margo raised her glass to the starry sky. A cool breeze fluttered the sleeves of her custom gown, a splurge, but one that seemed worth it when you finally went from struggling for a life goal to attaining it. She wondered what her father had worn on this night so many years ago. Probably an elegant tux. Her mother had been at that party as well. They'd met there, the famous photographer and sophisticated fashion model. But the storybook romance had ended just 3 years later in a war-torn valley in Afghanistan. Margo had never even met him. She'd come into the world 2 months after he'd died. But he was still her hero. Still the person her mother had loved above any other. Of course, Margo had followed in his footsteps, although she'd stayed far away from the battlefields where most photojournalists became famous. Drinking alone? The question came from behind her, and she turned to see the firm jaw and tan skin of Kirk Jones, badass war photographer extraordinaire and fellow Butler Prize nominee. "So, they let you in," Margo smirked, then looked into his bold green eyes, entranced as always. She let her own eyes wander the length of him. He'd slicked back his usually spiky black hair and wore an actual suit with a tie instead of a worn cargo pants and a ratty t-shirt. "You clean up well." "So do you. You're gorgeous tonight." He stepped close and bent to kiss the tender spot between her cheek and lip. All the feelings came swooning back. The week they'd spent in Zanzibar lying on sugar sand beaches under a hot African sun when they weren't in the hotel room. The half-dozen other one-night stands when they'd happened to be in the same location. She took a step back. "This is a big night. We have to be on our best behavior." Farthest thing from well-behaved, Kirk walked the line between brilliance and madness. Known for blowing up when things didn't go his way, he'd been tossed out of several countries and fired by half a dozen magazines. She didn't need that tonight. Green eyes stared back at her. She didn't need it, but boy, did she want it. "Come on, Margo, this is your big night. Everyone says you're a shoo-in for the prize. If this isn't a night for misbehaving, then I've been living my life wrong." That made her laugh. "I think there may be a few people who would argue about how you're living your life. Tomorrow you'll have fame and fortune. In this fickle business, the rewards of winning this prize last a lifetime. I'd say it's better than sex, better than love, lasts longer anyway." He turned and looked toward Lake Como. He almost had it right. This kind of fame brought adulation and love. It had for her father. Admirers still talked about his brilliance and how much they loved him, loved his work. And he had found real love here with her mother, a love so strong she'd never recovered. If it happened, if Margo won the prize, all that would come her way. She had a shot, but the outcome hinged on tomorrow. "There are no guarantees," she said, "and your photos of the Russian military camps are extraordinary." "They're just war photos, love. A dime a dozen these days. They don't compare to the shot of your Venezuelan refugee mother and her kids. Amazing." He shook his head. "Thanks." Her heart squeezed at the thought of Maria Luisa and her 4 children. Margo had found them on a treacherous path along the Panamanian jungle. A constant stream of immigrants had passed Margo that day. When she saw Maria Luisa, she'd been afraid the child splayed across her chest was dead. The woman had asked her for help, and Margo had given her a liter of water mixed with powdered sports drink. The mother kissed the boy and put the bottle to his lips. He sputtered awake, then drank. Alive, though far from healthy. Margo held up her camera, silently asking for permission, and photographed the family. She'd taken over 100 photographs as Maria Luisa tended to her children. Margo could almost see the tendrils of love holding the exhausted family together. She became invested in their journey, entwined in a mother's love stronger than any she'd ever known. Of course, the photographs were good. They represented that love. Margo brought herself back to the starry night and the handsome man in front of her. She craved love, had searched for it with him, with others. So far, she'd only found love in photography. When she fell in love with her subject, she could translate that emotion into an image that would last forever. It never failed. When she really fell in love with her subject, others fell in love with photos. Her photos of Maria Luisa had earned her a shot at the Butler Prize, but there had been many prizes before that. This one would change everything. Like with her father, people across the world would know her name and admire her work. She couldn't wait to feel that kind of love. Until then, perhaps Kirk's would do. So, what did you have in mind for tonight? She asked. Well, champagne is lovely, but you should try this. He pulled a flask from the inside pocket of his blazer. Hold your glass steady. This will make your drink even better. Half a dram of amethyst liquid swirled into the champagne. Margo brought the glass to her lips, sipped, then coughed. What is this? It tastes like herbs and dirt. Latin Quarter absinthe, a specialty made here in Italy. A dimple appeared in his cheek as he smiled. Absinthe? Are you crazy? Isn't that like a drug? Besides, I thought absinthe was green. She should have known better than to trust him. It's a special kind, and it's totally fine. The taste will grow on you. He took a sip straight from the flask. Let me know when you're ready for more, and I really hope to see you later. He put the flask away and stepped forward again, this time lifting her chin and kissing her gently on the lips. I miss you. She licked the trace of absinthe he'd left on her lips as she watched him fade into the crowd. This was her night. She should have fun. She took a long sip of the champagne. Time to stop being a wallflower and enjoy the party. She spied the editor of World Geography magazine. Dave Hirschhorn had published her refugee photos. Dapper in a tux and paisley bow tie, his 6'6" frame dwarfed the man beside him. Margo recognized the shorter man's face but couldn't place him. She approached the men. Dave, nice to see you. Margo stretched her hand to him in greeting. Ah, the star of the show. Margo, I'd like to introduce you to Andrei Andropov, president of Turkmenistan. So that's why he looked familiar. The newly minted dictator of a small Asian country tucked between Russia and Western Europe had spent his first year in office threatening the countries around him and building the republic's nuclear capability, at least according to what she'd read in the media. Nice to meet you, Mr. President. Her words flailed, but she offered him her hand. Please call me Andre. He took her hand and leaned toward her, placing a damp kiss on each cheek. He smelled of strong cologne, and arrogance filled his icy blue eyes. Ugh. She pulled her hand from his grasp. I just told Dave how beautiful your photographs are, Andre said in heavily accented English. You are sure to win tomorrow. Here's hoping. Margo crossed her fingers behind her back. Thanks for supporting my work. She nodded at Dave. We certainly have high hopes for her, Dave said. The refugee photo series had some of the most traffic we've ever seen on the magazine's website. It's impossible to look at them without being pulled into that world, feeling the love of that mother for her children. That's Margo's secret, you know. Love. What do you mean? Andre asked. Dave cocked his head and looked at Margo. Is it a trade secret, or do you share it? It's not a secret. She turned her attention to Andre. There's this moment. It only happens sometimes, but when it does, I can feel myself falling in love with the subject. It can be a person, an animal, or a landscape. I know the photo's going to be good when I fall in love. Is this true? Andre asked. Dave chimed in. The white wolf you photographed in Canada, the first picture we bought from you, did you have that feeling then? Head over heels. He was so beautiful. His coat captured the light against a backdrop of glowing snow, and intelligence filled his yellow eyes. I know this photo, said Andre. You really are an amazing photographer. One of these days, we're going to have to put you on staff, Dave said. I'd love that. The magazine rarely took on new photographers, and Margo had only worked with them as a freelancer. Perhaps this prize would bring a steady paycheck as well as fame. She smiled at the possibility of a golden future opening before her. Give my office a call when you're back in the States and we'll set up an interview. Thank you. I really appreciate that. She wanted to hug him, but settled for drinking the rest of her champagne. Before you start working for this man, I have a job for you. Andre reached out and grabbed her hand. I need new state photographs of myself. I would like you to take them. Oh, thank you, but I don't do portrait photography. But your photos in the show are of that woman. If you can fall in love with her, then surely. He leaned back, arms wide. His perfectly cut suit stretched across a broad chest and thick biceps. It doesn't work like that. Margo wanted to laugh at the audacity of this guy. She looked at Dave instead. He shrugged. No help at all. But you can try. You can come to my castle in the mountains, be my guest. I am sure that if you spend some time with me, see the beautiful ways of my people, you will find something to love. Thank you for the offer. Really, I just don't do portrait photography. I tell a story with my work to make the beauty I see accessible to others. It's art. That is what I need. Other people of these big countries, they don't see the pride and power of Tyrannistan. I need to tell the world this story. I lead a fine people, and I am their chosen son. Your photographs could make people believe. I'm sure your country is wonderful. Margo scanned the crowd for an escape. Perhaps I can recommend someone who does this type of work. It's nice to meet you, but I need to circulate. Wait, I will pay you 100,000 US dollars to take photos of me. Spend 2 weeks in my country and take my portrait. No one else will pay you this much. Holy shit, was this guy real? That was crazy money. Even tomorrow's prize, extremely rich by photography standards, only paid 40,000. Still, she couldn't imagine spending 2 weeks with this jerk, much less falling in love with him. Thank God for that prize money. Thank you. That's an amazingly generous offer, but I promise you I'm not the first person for this. She almost couldn't believe her own words. Most people would take the money and shoot the best photo they could, but her father had passed his talent to her. She couldn't abuse this gift by giving this guy credibility via her photos. She slunk away from the two men, hoping to lose herself in the crowd. Think about it, she heard Andre say. I'll leave you with this offer for 30 days. After she threaded her way through the throng of black suits and sparkling dresses, stopping only to swipe another glass of champagne from her tray, she reached the edge of the terrace and sat on a stone bench. The applique flowers and vines sewn into the layers of chiffon pressed gently into her skin where the dress met stone. What had she done? Adrenaline coursed through her. Had this Andre guy really just offered her $100,000 to take his picture? And worse, had she just turned him down? What was wrong with her? The profit from selling her grandparents' house and the money she'd inherited after her mother died had allowed her to purchase an extremely modest apartment in New York. And her work paid the bills, but she didn't have a retirement plan. At 27, she hadn't thought she needed one. She shook her head. She'd had a negative reaction to Andre from the second she'd met him. Trust your gut. There had to be a catch. No one would just offer a photographer that kind of money. More than once, her grandmother had said that if a deal looked too good to be true, it probably was. The grandmother always directed the admonition at her mother, while Margo, a nearby shadow, watched the women argue. She shook her head again. Thinking about her beautiful, foolish, dead mother only led to sadness and anger. This night was Margo's. She studied the posh surroundings, an Italian villa, twinkling lights and sparkling people. She made her way to the balustrade overlooking the lake. The moon cut a shimmering path across the water. Her father's legacy had brought her here. She had earned this night. Soft footsteps approached from behind. She turned to see Kirk, then his warm palm landed on her bare back. Just for a moment, she wanted to snuggle into him to find that cocoon of love she forever sought. But Kirk was definitely the wrong person. Party boy, hotshot photographer, he'd slept his way around the world more than once. Hey, stranger, she said. Why are you out here all alone on your big night? I just needed a break from the crowd. You know, there's no guarantee I'll win. You've got a shot, too. A familiar doubt pushed its way in. Too many people had said she'd win the prize. It made her nervous. Life was rarely that easy. No, you'll get it. The woman in your photos was exactly the type of person these upper echelon artsy types like to vote for. War is passé. Kirk removed his hand from her back and leaned his elbows on the balustrade. What an ass. Trying to save face by making it about Maria Luisa instead of Margo's talent. She could have told him his photos would be more powerful if he focused a little less on blood and gore and a little more on the tragedy before him. She turned her back to the lake and watched him. He stared at the water a long minute before straightening and facing her. Hey, would you like some more of my magical elixir? He pulled the flask from his jacket. Then he grinned, seeming to return to himself, all dimples and smiling eyes. Sure. She offered him her half-full glass. Photographer's drink. It was in the job description. Whatever that flask held, it didn't seem to have a negative effect on her. She smiled at him. It had been a long time since she'd shared her bed. Way too long. And in Zanzibar, she'd learned photography was his second best talent. Her smile must have conveyed her thoughts because he came in close and kissed her. Every synapse and nerve ending in her body lit up. She pressed herself against him. His kiss grew stronger, deeper. He wrapped an arm around her, grabbing her and pulling her hard against him. Some of the champagne had spilled out of the glass and onto her finger. Wait. She licked the liquid from her hand. That's hot, he said, watching her. Let's pick this up after the party's over. I'd love to spend the night with you. I'd like that. And I've got a suite with a gorgeous view of the lake. That sounds magnificent. It's going to be a wonderful night. He kissed her again, resting his lips against hers for a moment, then backing away. You need to get out there and work the crowd. This is your party. She nodded, warmed by his touch and the thought that she didn't have to go to bed alone tonight. She took a deep breath and a sip of her drink and stepped toward the crowd. Tonight she'd snagged an interview and a night with Kirk. Who else? Who knew what else the evening held? This time, the amethyst addition to her champagne had a wonderful effect. Margo approached people she didn't know, and words flowed from her tongue. Normally, she preferred engaging with her eyes, preferably behind a camera where people couldn't see through to her heart. But tonight, everything spun loose and free. She transformed into the person she'd always envied, the woman who could speak with anyone, charming and full of intelligent conversation. Her mother had been like that, the light of every party. Margo could picture her in this crowd, her father spying her, perhaps on the same patio, falling in love in an instant. Margo used that energy as she moved from one person to the next. Would she fall in love tonight? Doubtful, but at least she had plans for later. She spied Kirk a few people away, deep in conversation with Andrei Antropov. She inhaled sharply, turning her attention from whoever she'd last spoken with. Was Andrei offering Kirk $100,000 to take his portrait? Kirk would take that deal in a second and wouldn't even think about it. Why had she let morals get in the way of money? It wasn't even morals, just some deep-seated aversion, some message from her father begging her to turn down the offer. If it had even been that. She kept them in sight, using other people as shields so they wouldn't see her watching them. Not that they would have noticed. They leaned slightly toward each other, buried in a conversation that seemed to cancel the noise around them. Finally, Andrei reached his hand out. Kirk looked at the gesture for a moment, then nodded his head once and palmed the other man in a firm handshake. Just after that, Andrei looked off to the side and raised a finger. Soon, a large man in a black suit and shirt approached Andrei and Kirk. He pulled something out of his breast pocket, a small envelope, a business card. Margo couldn't tell for sure. Andrei took it and offered it back to Kirk. Whatever it was, Kirk slipped it into his back pocket, shook Andrei's hand again, then looked around the crowd. Margo ducked to the side and found herself standing in front of a tall woman. She introduced herself automatically, still wondering what had happened between Kirk and Andrei. It's nice to meet you, said the woman. I'm Sonia Brava with Nikon. Oh, very nice to meet you. You make wonderful cameras. They did, but her dad shot with a Canon, so Margo had always done the same. We do make excellent cameras. By the way, your photos for this contest are extraordinary. Have you ever considered changing cameras? Had this woman crawled inside her head? I've always used a Canon. It's what my father had. Ah, yes, Mike McAllister. I knew your father. You did? Many of the older people in the industry worked with her father, and she always loved hearing about it. Yes, we were on assignment in Iran together, and then again in Afghanistan, although not the last time we went. The time he died. I'm sorry, Sonia said. The world lost a brilliant photographer that day, but I'm sure it was nothing compared to losing your dad. I guess, Margo said. Never knew him. He died a couple of months before I was born. I'm sorry to hear that. He was a wonderful man, not just a great photographer. When he knew what he shot, When he knew what shot he wanted, he'd stop at nothing to get it. He was the rare combat photographer who saw the story behind the war, how everyone loses in war, but he was also kind. It's not something you see in the field. What do you mean? Well, he always had something in his pocket for the kids. He hated the hazing that comes with the industry and tried to stop it when he saw it. He helped me out a few times. I'm glad to hear it. I hadn't heard that about him before. You know, you're at least as talented as he was. Your images show something beyond what's on the paper. There's such emotion in your work. It's like you've layered something extra between the gloss and the pixels. Thank you. That's a really nice thing to say. The compliment resonated in Margo. She didn't want to admit love provided that extra ingredient in her photos. It sounded crazy, but Margo knew it was true. Those special photos, when Margo fell in love, they did have something extra. It was a bit of herself that she left in the image. And tomorrow, when she won the award, the adulation she expected would refuel all she'd given. She'd waited so long for this. Margo, I have a proposition for you. Would you be willing to try an icon? I'll give you our top of the line free, just to test it out. If you like it, I'd love to talk to you about a sponsorship deal. Oh my God. The future fell into her lap with each person she talked to. Of course, I'd be happy to test the camera. Wonderful. Here's my card. Contact me at your convenience and I'll get you that camera. Thank you. I think this could be the start of a wonderful partnership for both of us. Absolutely. The woman smiled, then drifted away. Margo stood amongst the glittering people under the starlit Italian sky. Perhaps she'd slipped into a fairy tale. Who knows what offer would come in next with midnight still an hour away. Speaking of offers, Kirk walked into her vision. If Andre had offered him the deal he'd offered her, she'd probably hear about it pretty quickly. Hey there, having fun tonight? She asked. It's a good party, but it's even better to be with you. I brought you another glass of champagne. He took her empty one and replaced it with a fresh glass filled with bubbling liquid the color of corn silk with a touch of honey. No absinthe? She asked. Not this time. I'm almost out and you don't need any more. It's potent stuff. Or maybe since I've already agreed to spend the night with you, you don't need to waste any more of your magical elixir on me? Oh, it's not like that. He added a low growl to his voice and stepped in close. Can't wait to get you on your own. Wouldn't want you to get too drunk to have a good time. Margo laughed. How could one man be so arrogant and so achingly attractive? She took a long sip of the drink. Well, thank you, I guess, for looking out for my best interests. His playful gaze disappeared for a moment, and she watched worry cross his brow. His bad boy veneer rarely dropped. Hey, what's going on? Nothing. It's nothing. I just forgot to get myself a drink now that the flask is empty. I'll be right back. Then he was gone. She wondered if something had happened with Andre. Perhaps he'd told Kirk about what he'd offered her to take his portrait. That would not have made competitive Kirk happy. After all, if she won the award, then he'd lose. And if he thought she'd receive some big payout from a dictator, well, that wouldn't do much for his ego. The night became more interesting still. She wondered what would happen back in her room. Hopefully, the drama only resided in her imagination. Miss Margo? The accented voice came from behind her. She turned, and sure enough, Andre stood before her. Hello again. How's your evening? This is a beautiful villa, yes? It's lovely. She took a long sip of champagne to keep her mouth busy. She hated that her questionable decision had returned to haunt her. If you like this, you will love my castle. I believe you will see it someday. I want to give you my card. He handed her a black business card. It has my private phone number and email in case you decide to take my offer. Well, you certainly are persistent. She reached for the card. She had expected paper, but the black metal had sharp corners and heft. A gold seal embossed one side, a phone number and email the other. No name. Shady. Mr. Jones, have you met Margo McAllister? Kirk's warm hand pressed firmly into the bare skin of her back as he came up beside her. Clearly, they'd met. Yes, Margo and I go way back. She is a very talented photographer, Andre said. I look forward to seeing more of her. Until tomorrow. He raised a glass of caramel-colored liquid in a toast, then melded into the crowd. I've met some people who have an after-party planned. Are you in? Kirk asked. She looked into his green eyes, a sudden happiness surging through her. The twinkle lights brightened and the colors deepened, midnight sky slips of gem-toned silk gliding through the crowd. I think the absinthe may be getting to me. Besides, I thought we were going back to my place. Oh, we'll definitely make it to your place. Finish up your champagne and I'll take you to meet this crew. You'll love them. We can move the party to your place if it's more convenient. Come on, toss it back. He touched her glass with a finger. Margo lifted the glass to her lips. Buoyant just a moment ago, she now felt the energy draining from her. She leaned into the hand on her back and imagined herself in her suite's king-size bed with the unbelievable soft linens and Kirk touching her. Hey, you okay there? He asked. She must have closed her eyes a little too long. I'm here. I'll meet your friends, but I'm really thinking about you. Come on, let's go. We've got a long night ahead of us. He wrapped an arm firmly around her shoulders and led her out of the party. Tiredness pulled at her as they walked across the marble foyer and out the door. A group of 6 people, 4 large men and 2 beautiful women, looked up at them from street level, their faces lit from the villa's entry. Who are they? She whispered. She hadn't noticed them at the party, and the men's ill-fitting blazers and gum-soled loafers didn't rise to gala standards. Both women had long, straight brown hair, heavily lined eyes, and low-cut knit dresses. She understood why they would have drawn Kirk's eyes. They exuded his renegade charm. I told you, they're friends. Lots of fun. He pulled her towards the steps. I think I'm going to go to my hotel. Sleepiness took over. She'd have sat right there, laid her head on the cool stone steps, and slept if he hadn't held her up. Instead, she missed the first step and tripped. 2 of the men surged forward and caught her. She closed her eyes. Margo woke to banging. Groggy, she lifted her head. The room swirled around her. People in black strode back and forth through her vision. She heard something shatter and looked right. Kirk sat on the bed beside her. Hey, she mumbled. What's going on? We came back to your place just like you wanted. He leaned back and spread his body along hers. Why? No. What was that noise? Her jumbled thoughts refused to assemble properly. She laid her head back as Kirk trailed a finger down along her temple, then down to her chin. She let herself sink back into darkness.